Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. In this video, we want to talk about what do consultants actually do. If you don't know who we are, my name is Neel.
And I'm Rohit.
And somewhere, probably on Rohit's face, I'll link our intro video. So if you want to see a little bit more about what we plan to do with the coming videos we want to make, click there. But right now we'll talk about what do consultants do. We'll break it down into four main sections. In the first one, we're going to talk a little bit about the different levels of consulting, just kind of what different consulting firms do, because consulting is a pretty vague and broad term. Second, we'll talk about why people even hire consulting firms, like why can't they just do it themselves. Third, we'll talk about what you actually do when you're a consultant, like what are the literal things you do on the job. And then fourth, kind of tying into that, we'll talk about the day-to-day things that you do as a consultant, and I can give some examples of what I've done in the past.
Yeah. The first thing is what exactly is consulting and the different tiers of consulting firms. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of consulting firms that specialize in like a few things. So one example is accounting or maybe IT. And the strategy firms specifically, so Bain, BCG, and McKinsey, they're kind of overall strategy for a business. So one example would be if a coffee maker wanted to expand their shops in China, they would come to one of these three firms to figure out how best to strategically move to a new market like China. Another example could be maybe a company is losing on profitability. Maybe a food delivery company is all of a sudden losing its profits. And so they would come to a company like Bain, McKinsey, or BCG to figure out how to get back to higher profitability.
Yeah, and then there are smaller consulting firms, of course. Let's say that example that Rohit mentioned earlier of a company wanting to move into China and sell coffee. Then after they're successfully in China, they might hire a Chinese consulting firm to help them with the marketing or the advertising because they might not be used to that. So those are just kind of the different ways that consulting firms can be hired and used to help other companies. So that brings us to our next question, which is why do companies even hire management consulting firms? Couldn't they just do it on their own?
Yeah, so the first one we wanted to talk about was management consulting firms have been doing it for many years, so they've kind of specialized in this niche of strategy, and so they've seen the problems that companies come across time and time again and can give good advice on what exactly to do. For example, the partners in these firms have seen cases in a specific industry for many, many years, and so they know a lot of the data in the industry that drives kind of macro trends and can accordingly give good advice.
I think another one involves the fact that if a company has a problem that might take their employees 20, 30 extra hours per week to solve, they can't just tell their employees to stop working on their 40-hour or 50-hour a week day job to then focus their attention on the new thing because they still have to run the company. And so the benefit of hiring outside consultants is one, you can hire really intelligent, smart people who are willing to work really hard without having to have any of the human resources, HR, or the recruiting expenses. You can just hire them, tell them what they need to work on, and have them work on that, while the people who are still working on your company as your own employees continue with their everyday jobs. So that's another reason why management consulting firms get hired. And then the last thing that we wanted to mention on this topic was that as a consultant, you can up-level problems that the CEO might not necessarily see every day. For example, on the previous case I was on, I was working with analysts who were maybe 3 to 4 levels below the C-suite, and they were encountering problems that were the reason why the company as a whole was having a lot of the problems that the C-suite was seeing. And so as a consulting firm, we were able to talk to a lot of different people who don't talk to each other normally, condense all of that, and present it and kind of communicate it to the C-level in a way that it wasn't presented before in an objective manner. So it was a way for us to be able to enact change that needed to be enacted, but people within the company didn't necessarily have the communication channels to be able to do it themselves.
So the next topic we want to talk about is what do you actually do on the job? And since I'm an incoming intern and Neil's actually working at Bain, I think he should take this question.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about what I did and what my team did during the case I was on when I was an intern. So the company that we worked on was a company that made data center infrastructure, which you can think of as Google or Amazon. They have a bunch of servers in some room somewhere holding all of our photos and videos and whatnot. And those servers need infrastructure to be able to operate properly. So things like heating and cooling systems and things making sure that they're getting the right power. Those are the kinds of things that the company that we were working for made. And the problem that they had was that their CEO was a newly elected CEO, and he came in and he realized that their sales organization was a reason why their revenue wasn't increasing. And so what he wanted us to do was essentially to reculture their organization, kind of meaning help them become more ambitious on their sales targets, sales goals, and then also just in general have a better understanding of how to be able to increase how much they're selling. And then also too, he wanted us provide him with clarity as to how he could help. So the way that we help them is by working on their account plan strategy. And what an account and an account planning is, I'll kind of explain. An account is essentially a relationship that you have with someone that you're selling stuff to. So let's say, I kind of use this like stupid analogy, but bear with me. Let's say that I'm a person who sells pencils, and I sell pencils to Rohit. If I am a good salesperson, I will know things like how many pencils Rohit has sold in the past. Is he someone who breaks a lot of pencils? You know, like does he need to buy a bunch of new ones? Or is he someone who will switch over to pens soon, right? Because if I don't sell pens and he wants pens, then I'm out of business. And so, sounds kind of stupid, but this is a condensed version of the kinds of information you would need to have in your account and when you're going about account planning. The problem with a lot of the sales leads we were working with is they didn't even have an account plan. They didn't know how much they had historically sold to the people that they were selling things to, companies like Google or Amazon or Facebook. They didn't know how much these companies would want in the future, and they didn't know what kinds of materials or what kinds of resources they needed, which are all kind of key questions that you or I might want to know when trying to sell to people. And so what we did was go through basically like a 4-month process of working with all of these sales leads who made up a pretty significant portion of this company's revenue. We worked with these sales leads to essentially develop a better way of thinking about how to go about an account planning.
Yeah, I guess the question I have is why didn't the company implement these strategies before? What do you think was the main hindrance to that?
I don't think there would have been anyone in the company to be able to implement it. For example, we were a team of 7 or 8 people working a good like 50 to 60 hours a week. Like I don't think there was anyone who would have been able to do that in the company, especially considering that like when you're in a company already, you kind of have a reputation, you kind of have like social capital that you either can or can't use. And because we were people coming in new and with the support of the CEO, we kind of had the ability to be able to work with these people in a way that they were listening to us. So that was kind of why we were able to do it, whereas I don't think anyone in the company would have been able to.
Let's move on to the next question. What does a typical day look like at Bain? And again, I'm going to defer this to Neel.
Yeah, that's fine. And I can keep building off of the case I was just talking about when I was an intern. I guess one thing to clarify is when you're an intern at Bain, and definitely at any of the other big 3 firms, so McKinsey or BCG, you're definitely doing real work. I think within the first 2 weeks of my Bain internship, I had more work than I had in like a previous engineering internship for the entire summer in just 2 weeks. But what we did on a day-to-day basis with this account planning project was meet a lot with clients. We met a lot with these account leads, and essentially we were always talking to them about like, okay, like these are the kinds of things that we think we need to figure out for you to feel more successful about being a sales lead and having a good account plan. And we'd go through step by step and like say, all right, you need to know like who you need to have relationships with. You need to know how much this company has sold in the last 5 years in these different categories, and then also how much they're going to spend in these different categories in the next 5 years, you know, different big projects that they have coming up. So a bunch of that kind of stuff. We'd have meetings every other day or basically once a week where they would come and update us on what they had done for the week, and we would give them some numbers that we had to calculate for them. For example, there were some assumptions or some market sizing numbers that they just didn't know and weren't readily available on Google or something. For example, how much a company like Facebook is going to be selling in data center infrastructure in 2020, and this was in 2018. That's not a number that they're going to publish, of course, so we came up with some algorithm and then had different inputs to that we would go and find in different like articles or searching the internet, and then come back to them and say, hey, does this sound reasonable with your past experience, and kind of work with them on that. And on the same end, they would go to their side and have to figure out different relationships within the company that they knew they needed to keep or strengthen. And so with this kind of collection of information is what we were trying to do over the 4-month process of account planning. So that kind of sums up what we did kind of on a week-to-week basis. And then day-to-day for me, it was being in these meetings, either taking notes or interacting with the clients and kind of pushing them on like, hey, you said 10 million for how much you could get next year. Are you sure it's not 12 based on these numbers that we've been calculating on the side and you kind of agree with? Kind of just like having a back and forth with them, but using data rather than, of course, because they had the experience, not us. So we had to come with something else that they could agree with.
I guess a question I have for you then is, one thing we haven't touched on so far is how much do consultants actually work, which I'm sure, for me at least, was a big question. I'm sure for
yeah, for sure. At the big 3, and specifically at Bain, of course, a lot of what I say is going to be about Bain, but I think it's applicable across all 3. I think the average is close to 55 to 60, where you can have fluctuations where on a case that's really busy, you might go up to 65, 70, 75. But then on cases that are a little more chill, it might be closer to 40, 45. But generally, it'll average out around 55 to 60, I would say. 60 being like kind of the high average. For me, it's probably been closer to like 50 to 55. So
okay.
I've enjoyed that so far.
Those are all on weekdays, so It's about
Yeah.
like
Oh
12
yeah,
hours a
for
day.
sure, dude. Definitely not working on the weekends. Maybe once every like 10 weekends you might have an hour or two, or like some people they'll check their email on Sunday night just so that when Monday morning comes they can get their work done without having to worry about responding to emails and stuff. So it kind of depends on like the person and their preference, but there's definitely no pressure or no impetus to work on weekends unless it's absolutely necessary, which is nice.
And how many hours in a day would you say you spend with your team cracking the problem versus just like you alone and
On the
your
side.
on your work stream?
Yeah. I think that depends on what phase of the case. At the beginning, I think a good bit of your time is going to be on that, especially as coming in as like an intern or a first year consultant or associate consultant, kind of the position out of undergrad. You'll probably spend at least 4 to 5 hours interacting with your supervisor, maybe the broader team, on cracking the problem in the beginning of the case. And then towards the middle and the end, when you kind of have more clear-cut things of what you need to go do to solve the problem or to get the answer, it's just a matter of you going and executing. You might interact with your supervisor or like really be directly like in a conversation talking to them for maybe 2 to 3 hours. And that might be more so just to update them on the methodologies that you're going about, or just say like, hey, I got to this number, or I did this thing, how does that sound? What are like the next steps from that kind of stuff?
If you were to take a pie chart and say like 50% of like your time was spent on maybe data analytics and 50% was like with the client, does that change week to week what that pie chart looks like, or is it like relatively
Oh,
the
for
same?
sure, dude, definitely. I mean, that changes week to week, like I said, depending on whether you're at the beginning or the end of a project, but then also like the kind of answers that you need to solve. For example, during my internship case, that pie chart would have been really big on client interaction and would have had a decent amount on like quantitative, like working in Excel or in other programs that can help you like manipulate data and numbers. But on this last case I was just on during my full-time year, I was probably 30% client and then like 70% was on like data and like that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Cool. Well, that's all the questions I had for Neel. If you have any more questions, just put them in the comment section below. And the main purpose for this video is to give you a better idea of what consulting is like, so that you can make maybe a more informed decision on whether this is the path you want to pursue and this is something that is interesting to you or is something on the radar. We hope that this video gives you more information on what consultants actually do.
Cool. Sweet. We'll see y'all next time.